Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Schaberg here and Michelle Morris with Consolidated Planning Group. We're here with Monarch School today. We're going to be talking about Government Benefits 101. This is a topic that is very, very popular and one that is that really causes a lot of confusion and angst among families. So we're hoping to dispel some of the myths and untangle some of the confusion that surrounds things such as SSI and SSDI today. So let me give you a few little housekeeping items. Number one, today's webinar is being recorded. It will live on our podcast channel later. It is also going to live on our YouTube channel later. So everyone that is participating is going to get an email later this afternoon with a copy of the slides and any links that are in the slides, as well as a copy of the recording. We are in webinar mode today, and what that means is that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're there. We do want you to put your questions in the chat box. There are actually a lot of slides in today's presentation. I think that there's 30, and it was by design. There's not really enough time to go in depth on all of those slides today, but we put them in there and left them in there because there's a lot of valuable information. So when you get a copy of the slides, you'll have that additional information that we won't have a chance to get to today. Your questions are important to us, so we do invite you to put your questions in the chat box. Between the two of us, whoever's not talking will be monitoring the chat box, and we're going to answer just as many questions as we can. If this is your first time joining us, we're glad you're here. You're definitely in the right place. If you've attended our webinars in the past, we're definitely glad you're back. It is our heart to put information out there as it relates to planning for a loved one with special needs, really at any age. And we have our Consolidated Planning Group Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel out there where there's over 200 webinars on related topics for special needs and special needs planning. So you'll be able to kind of look at those titles and for the step that you're on in your planning journey, and you can check those out accordingly. So Consolidated Planning Group.
Yeah,
oh, sure. Yes, please.
Add that if you are listening to us on our podcast and you would like a copy of these slides, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net, and we'll send you a copy of the slides that we're going through today.
Perfect. Thank you. So Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We are domiciled in Sugar Land, and we serve families all across the U.S. So if you're attending from out of state, we can help you as well. We have over 30 years experience in insurance and financial services. We're fully licensed in insurance and securities. The big thing is, and what makes us a little bit different and unique, is we are members of the Special Needs Planning Academy, and we're nationally certified as Social Security advisors. So our practice is really specifically nuanced in serving families who have a loved one with special needs. We do protection plans. People come to us and they say, I have a loved one with special needs that I need to plan for the rest of their life, not just mine. How much do we need to fund a special needs trust? We can set up ABLE accounts. We do a lot of advocacy work through our YouTube channel and podcasts and webinars like this as well. And so we can certainly help you on your journey. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion when it comes to what is, what do we do? What does a special needs advisor do? And what does a special needs attorney do? A lot of times attorneys get questions and, such things as how much do I need to fund the special needs trust, or how do I plan? How do I have money in the right buckets to plan for my loved one? And that's not really what they do. And then we get a lot of questions a lot of times on how do I set up guardianship? I need a special needs trust, things like that. And so the reality of it is your situation is specialized and you do need both. So I always summarize it and say we're the money and they're the paper. So you got to have the legal documents. Those are very, very important, but you got to have the money in the right buckets. And so that is important as well. It is critically important when we have a loved one with a disability that we have things set up properly And so we always suggest that you work with a professional that is nuanced and special needs because your situation is specialized. We always suggest from an attorney. I mean, we actually have a lot of attorneys that we work with, but they're not nuanced and special needs. So they actually hire an attorney to do their documents that is nuanced and special needs. So we always say, don't use your brother next door or your next door neighbor that does real estate attorney, or your brother that's a corporate law attorney, because these documents are really, really important when it comes to your planning process. So, okay, let's get started. So I think the big thing here, Michelle, is the confusion between SSDI and SSI. It is a big deal. So
all those letter alphabet soup kind of tends to throw people off.
Well, the Social Security Administration uses a lot of acronyms and they throw them around, and a lot of them sound similar, but they're not synonymous, and some of them don't sound similar at all, but they are. So the first confusing thing that you got to know is for SSDI, Supplemental Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI. I think the confusion starts right there every time, Michelle, because we think my loved one has a disability, then they should qualify for Social Security disability. That makes complete common sense, but that is not how it works. So the Social Security Disability Insurance System, the source of the payment comes through the Disability Trust Fund. It's an insurance that workers earn by paying Social Security taxes on their wages. So a lot of our loved ones with a disability haven't worked, and so they basically haven't paid into this system. Okay, so you have to have so many working quarters in order to have benefits under SSDI. So this pays benefits to the disabled individual who are unable to work regardless of their income and resources. Benefits are for workers and for adults disabled since childhood, but they must meet the insured status requirements. So a lot of times, and maybe many of you have received a letter before that you were pretty upset about, saying that your loved one was denied for Social Security disability, or SSDI, and you can't believe it because clearly your loved one has a disability, and you just can't believe that they were denied benefits. And they weren't denied the benefits because they're not disabled. They're denied the benefits oftentimes because they have not paid into the system and they're not fully insured. So that is the big misnomer right there with SSDI. Michelle, tell us about Supplemental Security Income, SSI.
Okay, so SSI is a little bit different because, SSDI is paid through the Disability Trust Fund, the Social Security Disability Trust Fund, but SSI comes from general tax revenues, and it is a needs-based public assistance program where you don't have to have that work history built up. So for somebody who has never worked, they can draw SSI if they meet the requirements. So it pays disabled individuals who are unable to work and have limited income and resources. You have to have financial need, and there are guidelines in terms of limits of how much money you can make and how many assets or how much money you can have as assets before you can draw your SSI benefits.
We're definitely going to go into the details of kind of the money and what you're allowed to have. But another thing that is a little bit confusing on the SSI is, a lot of us have a loved one with a disability and maybe they are under age 18 when it comes to the financial requirements for SSI. So there's two reasons, as Michelle said: disabled, unable to work, and basically indigent by the standards. When you have a child or a loved one with a disability who is under the age of 18, those financial requirements are based off of the parent's income and assets, not the child. So once again, some families may have applied for SSI, their child is clearly disabled, and they were denied SSI, and they were simply denied not because the child isn't necessarily disabled, but because the parents simply make too much money or have too much assets while the child is under age 18, but everything changes when they turn 18. Michelle, do we have a question?
Well, we have two things mentioned here. Can we talk about transitioning from SSI to SSDI and how that changes the rules about paying for housing and preserving Medicaid? So I know we're going to get some of that. I just want to make sure that we get to the housing and Medicaid rules when we talk about that. Also, Angela wants to know, does this mean that somebody can get both programs at the same time? And the answer to that is no. You only get one at a time, unless, Allison, there's some sort of rules about, if your SSDI benefit is too low, you can still get some SSI money. Is that right?
Yes, we actually, so you don't get both, like, the SSI and the SSDI in the example of, kind of lumping both benefits at their maximum potential. It doesn't work like that. But we do and have seen where a person is getting both SSDI and SSI, where the individual with a disability has worked and earned some credits under their own record. But maybe not enough to be as much as SSI. So in that example, they may be getting a little bit of both. And then we are going to talk about converting over when a parent retires. We're going to talk about converting childhood disability benefits or RSDI under a parent's record. We're going to go a little bit deeper on that. Switching over as far as housing and Medicaid, I'm not sure that we have a slide for this, so I'll just mention that in any case, when we are talking about the means-based test, which we are definitely gonna get to, you can have one house and one car. The individual with the disability can have one house and one car. And now whether or not you want the house for the individual with the disability to be inside a special needs trust, you would work with an attorney on that. A lot of times families want to protect the house for the individual with the disability in a trust to prevent anybody trying to kind of, take advantage of your loved one and try to take their house away from them. So one house and one car. Now, every once in a while, somebody will put in the chat box, I heard you can have more than one car. You kind of can. It's very convoluted, and you can Google that on the SSA.gov website. But it's basically if you have two cars and one of the cars is really, really old, or you owe a ton of money on it, or if you would use that second car as final expense for burial, for that individual, then you might be able to get by with having more than one car. But there are some very specific rules on that. And then also the one house and the one car doesn't mean one house and then an additional 5 acres of land and a car, because that would be too much. So if the land and the house were all on one deed, that would be considered one house. So that's important to know that. Okay, can we also review what happens when a disabled person is receiving survivor benefits? So we will attempt to
that, right?
Yeah, I think we do. We'll attempt to get to that today. So the disability rules for over age 18. So under age 18, we were just highlighting that it's based off of the parent's income and assets, not the child. Over age 18 for disability, SSDI, SSI, you have to have a physical or mental impairment. Disability is expected to last 12 months or result in death. They're going to consider age, education, and past work activity, and the basic inability to perform substantial work activity. Okay, so substantial gainful activity. What we're talking about here. Basically, this is what the Social Security Administration says, is that if an individual that is applying for SSI or SSDI is earning more than the SGA, which stands for Substantial Gainful Activity, for 2023, that amount is $1,470 gross earnings per month. For an individual that is blind, that amount is $2,460 gross earnings per month. So basically, you can work and still get SSI, but if you are working at the time of your application, earning more than the substantial gainful amount, regardless of your disability, you are going to be denied, because basically they're saying you're not disabled if you can earn this amount of money. So for supplemental security income, SSI only uses SGA as a measure of work during initial claims. SSDI uses SGA throughout the life of the claim. So that is important to talk about. So for
Allison,
SSI,
are
yes.
you saying that if they are earning 1370 or more after they get their SSI, then that's okay?
So no, we're going to talk about how earnings affects working on SSI. So a person can work. There are a lot of programs out there. We're going to talk about those. But I'm saying when you're applying for SSI, if the individual is earning more than $1,470 gross per month, then they're not going to be eligible for SSI. And the other thing that you need to know is if your loved one has earned more than $1,470 gross per month, then they're not going to be eligible for child disability benefits under a parent's record, which we're going to get to in a moment. So the SSI benefit rates for 2023, they went up from $841 a month, and they are now $914 per month. SSI comes along with Medicaid. And if a couple is married and they're both disabled in the eyes of the Social Security, it's $1,371 per month is basically the amount. Okay, so one of the things I just want to make sure that I hit on the means-based test. So we were really talking about SSI, and it's for the indigent and the disabled, and they're doing a means-based test, and that's basically the individual cannot have more than one house or one car, which we were talking about, which is true for Medicaid as well. And also they have to follow the Medicaid guidelines for being indigent, which is no more than $2,000 in their name. So if an individual is disabled, if they're over 18, it's no more than $2,000 in their name. So when it comes to determining whether or not a person is disabled, the Social Security Administration has something called the Blue Book, and this is basically a medical impairment guide. You'll be able to click the link on this, or you can Google Social Security Blue Book, and you can look up every single impairment that your loved one has, and it's going to tell you what you're going to have to prove to the Social Security Administration to prove that the individual is in fact disabled. And I'll always hear what I would say. So there is a Blue Book for under age 18, and then over age 18 is the adult listing. So if you're planning on applying for your child that's transitioning, turning 18 years old, you're going to want to look at the adult impairment guide, even though they still seem like a child in your mind or whatever. You're going to want to look at that adult impairment guide. If you are, if your child has a disability and they are under age 18, you're going to look at the childhood listings. And just remember, any families that are applying for SSI for their minor child, it's going to be the income and assets of the parents, not the child. It's so super important to know that. And the thing is if you're over the income and assets limit as a parent, you have a minor child, it is a waste of your time to apply for SSI. It will take you a lot of time, and it will be frustrating, and you definitely will get denied. So I want to put that out there. I don't want to be discouraging, but I always am a fan of saving time if you can certainly help that. Okay, so what should you apply for and when? So Michelle, you want to take this here?
Yeah. And I would encourage, we have a question in the chat box that just says, so how do you know? You were on the last slide when that came through. I think maybe, do we need more clarification on that question? I'm not sure. How do you know?
Yes, please. Yeah, let's clarify that. Now, and one more thing on that Blue Book, don't forget all of the diagnoses. So we might have a number of diagnoses that, or one in particular that you think is disabling, but there may be another diagnosis that would be considered disabling. So for instance, sometimes people forget, intellectual disability, which is an IQ below 70. They're quick to put down autism or Down syndrome or some of the other things. But if there is, like for instance, some of our Down syndrome families, they've had bouts of leukemia, they've had heart issues, they might be on the autism spectrum, there might be an intellectual disability. Well, I just named off a bunch of things. So you're going to want to look all of those impairments up in that medical impairment guide. Okay, take it from here, Michelle.
Thank you. So what should you apply for and when and how and all of that stuff? It can get confusing. So you should apply for SSI during the month of your child's 18th birthday. Actually, the day after they turn 18, you can apply for SSI. Now, sometimes they're backed up. The offices can take your application at the office or by phone, but online is really the best way. And you can go online to this website here. That will be a clickable link that you'll be able to go to go to apply for SSI online. One cool thing about that is that if you apply online, it saves the date that you did the application. And then once your benefits are approved, if they are approved, they'll be backdated to that date when you filled in the application. So even if the Social Security Administration is behind on getting all of these applications figured out, you're still going to be safe with that. So you want to have evidence that demonstrates that your child's disability began before age 22. And then they'll be able to qualify for childhood disability benefits, which used to be called DAC, disabled adult child, but now it's called CDB. And the reason we want you to know that is because some of the people at the Social Security Administration office might refer to either or. And we want you to know that that's the same thing. So disabled adult child, childhood disability benefits, those are the same things. So gather up your kid's medical history, have a chat maybe with your physician, see if you can take a look at your child's records and see what's on there. Compare that to the Blue Book. What do you need to prove that your child has a disability? And make sure they match up. You're going to want to have your physician's name, address, phone number, whatever diagnoses your child has, what medications they're on. It doesn't really matter how much they take, but what medication and what is that for? And then, if they have an employer, if they have any earnings, they'll want to know about that too. And then they will want to see bank statements for the past 3 months. So that's all I have on that. Again, consider chatting with your child's doctor to see what they're going to say.
And I would just like to add here, Michelle, I used to, I'm just going crazy with the slides here. I used to recommend really that you go in person and apply in person as opposed to, over the phone or online. But now this new online tool, they set this up last year, and because it saves your date. So first of all, the online tool takes about 5 minutes to apply. You don't have to take all day. It's good. 5 minutes, and it basically gives them notification that you're wanting to apply, and then it's going to tell you that they're going to call you in a couple of weeks to schedule your appointment. Usually it's 2 to 3 weeks before you get your phone call. If it hasn't happened in 2 to 3 weeks, then I would call your local office and find out what's going on. So then once they call you, they're not calling you for the appointment, they're calling you to set the appointment. So you've got some time once you give your notice to apply. And what I would recommend in, kind of getting ready for your appointment, the information down below as far as gathering medical records, names, address, phone numbers, that kind of thing. Don't forget the psychiatrist and the psychiatrist. They don't care about the licensed clinical counselor or anything like that. It's only doctors, MD doctors. But if they're going to want the primary care physician, they're definitely going to want any of the specialists. So if you see cardiology or neurology or any of the other specialties out there, you're going to want to have those too. But I recommend just creating a folder on your desktop and creating some Word documents and sliding them all in there. So that way you have everything ready when they do have the appointment. So it says whose bank statements, child's or parents. Since the child is 18, it's the child's money. It's the child's bank statements, not the parents. If the child is under 18, it's the parent's financial information. So, Michelle, do we have some questions before we move on?
We do, but I've been taking care of them in the chat, and you're going to talk about this stuff. So,
yep, perfect. Okay, so we're going to keep on moving. So the bottom line is if you would prefer to go in person and you would like to take all of your information with you, we suggest that you call your local office and set an appointment. If you don't set an appointment, you're literally going to sit down there 6 hours. I mean, it's a long time. It's a long, long time. So it's highly recommended that if you're going into the office, that you definitely have an appointment when you go in, and basically taking all of that information with you when you go. Okay, so what should you expect after you apply? First of all, one thing you should expect is that after you apply, when you apply, you're basically applying for SSDI and SSI at the same time. You don't always know that, but you are. And so the first thing that you should expect is that if your child hasn't worked, you should expect in short order a denial letter from SSDI. The interesting thing is the font that they use, the letters, they look confusing. So one will say it's coming from Social Security, and one will say it'll say SSI or Supplemental Security Income, but because they're coming from the same organization and they use the same fonts and stuff, it's confusing. So I've had a lot of people call me upset because they got the SSDI denial letter. You should expect the SSDI denial letter if your kid has not paid in to the system. That is completely appropriate. But what that letter doesn't tell you is that the SSI decision is still pending and that you'll get a separate letter and they haven't been denied for SSI. So there's always a lot of confusion there. So decisions usually take up to 6 months, sometimes longer. If you have had an experience that was shorter than that, yay you. That's awesome. I wish everybody did. But this is a long journey. It's not always fast. So basically what happens is once your local office has finalized your application, it is sent to DDS, which is Disability Determination Services in Austin. They are going to request and review your loved one's medical records looking for evidence of disability. This is where parents can get involved and can get things moving faster. Number one, after your application, there's going to be a release of information that needs to be signed. You need to pay attention to any letters that come to your house from the Social Security Administration. If they say you have this many days to submit this, that's what they mean. And they will close your case if you don't respond. So make sure you read the letters, make sure you understand, make sure you send in any releases. They can't get medical records until there's a signed release on file, so that is important. So basically, DDS can be reached at this number here. For the most part, our recommendations is that you always deal with your local office, not the national office. The national office is simply going to reroute you back to the local office. You'll hold for an hour, and then they'll reroute you back to the local office. Sometimes, lately, some of the local offices' phones are routed to the national office, which is pretty frustrating. But always try to deal with.
To apply online.
Correct. So bottom line is if you're trying to track what's going on after your application, say 2 or 3 weeks, you can call DDS and say, I just would like to check on my loved one's application for SSI. I would like to verify that you guys have it. And they're going to tell you whether or not they have it or not. If they don't have it, then that means somebody at the local office has not sent it yet, and you need to call back to the local office to see why it hasn't been sent to DDS. Another thing that has been coming up lately with DDS is that they'll say, yes, we have it, but it's waiting to be assigned. So one of my kids was waiting to be assigned for 6 months. So I called every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was waiting to be assigned for 6 months. They were kind of on a hiring freeze. They were understaffed. So you just want to make sure of that. But once your case has been assigned, you have a caseworker, and you'll be able to know their name and extension, and you can call your caseworker and find out what medical records they have received, what medical records are outstanding. You can find out the date that they sent the record request to the physician, and you can call your local physician to say, I want to make sure you got the SSI record request for little Johnny, it's important that you send it in by said date or they're going to close the application. We've literally seen people's applications closed because the physician didn't send the records in time. So being on top of this is important. Michelle, tell me about some of our questions.
Yes. So if you apply for SSI in person at the office, does your child have to go with you?
It's suggested there. So if a person has guardianship, you're going to want to have your guardianship papers with you. The Social Security Administration does not recognize power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, or any other supported decision-making agreement. They only recognize guardianship. So you'll want to take your guardianship paperwork with you. It is suggested that you take the loved one with you if that's an impossibility. There is something about being applying to be the representative payee for your loved one. A lot of our loved ones need a representative payee because they don't have the intellectual capacity to handle this, because they don't have financial, wherewithal to handle money and things like that. So you will want to let your representative know if you are wanting to apply as the representative payee for your loved one. If the child is a minor, the parent is automatically the representative payee. Okay. Sure.
I was going to say, there's another question here that their child was diagnosed when they were 3 years old. But the doctor has since passed away, and should they be retested? I mean, we recommend getting updated testing every 3 to 5 years if possible. So I think definitely.
And I think it just depends on what's in the medical records. If the diagnosis is not clear, a lot of times, since the child has been 3 years old, there's been a lot of medical things, there's prescriptions, there's all kinds of things happening. So the diagnosis should be clear in the other medical records. But, when it comes to testing for intellectual disabilities or other things, and this is simply just for accommodations in the school setting, testing is definitely important. Michelle, do you want to talk to us about the presumptive disability or compassionate allowances?
Sure. And you can look at the questions and stuff in the chat box while I do. So when you have, and there's a list of presumptive disabilities, they also call it a compassionate allowance. And what this is that they can give you up to 6 months of SSI based on the disability if the applicant has a condition on this list. So basically, they're saying that pretty much you're just going to go straight through a lot easier if you have this presumptive disability, and it can make the wait time a lot shorter for you. So it won't be so long to process everything. The local Social Security office can kind of, you have, you lost your leg at the hip. That's one of the things. Well, we know you're going to be approved, so we're just going to go ahead and get you started right away. So that's pretty cool. Also, DDS can make a presumptive decision if they see when they get your file that there's a high likelihood that the case is going to be approved. They'll just slide you on through. I think we had a list of some of the presumptive disabilities on the next page.
Okay, so we have a question that somebody said that they emailed a question. Will it be addressed? Please put that question in the chat box. We have another person that says, I have no income and I take care of my grandkids, and one has a specific diagnosis. So this is where it starts getting hairy. Do you have adoption or guardianship of the grandkids? So the grandkids may qualify for SSI and Medicaid. So it definitely depends on if there is no income coming in. And when we start getting to the disability or childhood disability benefits under a parent's record, it could be a parent, it could be a step parent. If it's a grandparent, you would have to have the child would have to be under adoption, not guardianship. Okay. So compassionate allowance lists, here's some examples of that. She mentioned there's a whole bunch. So you can Google compassionate allowance, presumptive conditions, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy is one that kind of rings true. There's hundreds of them out there, and they're adding new ones all the time. Intellectual disability of an IQ of 70 or below. Those are some examples. So basically, if your child has a presumptive condition, for instance, Down syndrome, their application is basically going to be, presumptively approved. And so they're going to start paying sooner while they're going through the approval process. They're going to start the payments a lot sooner if a person has a presumptive condition. Okay, so working.
Allison.
I'm sorry?
There's a couple of questions in the chat box that kind of relate to the same thing. So for just briefly, can you talk about how SSI and waiver programs like STAR Plus and MDCP are related or not? Because people are worried that if they get SSI, then they're going to lose STAR Plus or MDCP or other waivers.
Okay. So like the MDCP is based off of the child's income and asset, not the parents. Okay, so you're going to have to check with your caseworker. For any of the other waivers, you can have income coming in for these other waivers and not lose the waiver. There's certainly a lot of people that are on waivers that even work and have some other income coming in. So, but definitely because there's so many different waivers, and we have an entire presentation just about the waivers, I would say that you definitely want to look at your caseworker, look to your caseworker for that. You can also, if they don't know, you can get a supervisor, and you can one-off with us specifically to what the situation is, because a lot of it depends on if the child's a minor or an adult or things like that. Right. So how does working, affect your benefits? So we've mentioned before that a person that is getting SSI, they could work, right? But there is deductions for working, okay? So this is just an example of how earnings are going to work. So if your loved one has a disability, a lot of our loved ones have a disability, and they might be in a program like Summer Earn and Learn or Pre-ETS or Vocational Rehab, which is also known as VR. So the whole point of that is to close the gap on their impediments to employment to get them to go to work, right? So what we want to know here is, so what happens if they do work? So we've just given this example. So first things first, there's a general exclusion of income of the first $20. And if the person is working, they don't count the first $65 of earned income. So in the example that a person earned $1,200 gross monthly earned income in 1 month, we would subtract the $85. So we take $1,200 minus 85, and that brings us to $1,115. We're going to divide that by 2. And that is going to leave us with $557.50 of countable income. The SSI amount is $914 per month. We would subtract the $557.50, and the amount payable in SSI would be $356.50. And it wouldn't be that month. It would probably take effect a month or two after, because it doesn't happen right on. You report the earnings, and it's basically the following month or the next month where you're going to see that deduction. Do we have an additional question, Michelle?
I've got this one.
Okay, so this student earned income exclusion. So one of the things that you guys should know, and you have to ask for this, they don't tell you, there is something called a student earned income exclusion. And basically it's saying if the child is between the ages of 18 and 22 and regularly attending school, they don't count their income up to $2,220 per month when calculating their SSI. Okay, so if the student is between ages 18 to 22, you can apply for the student earned income exclusion. They have to be in school at least 8 hours a week if it's a college or university. So note that if the individual has a disability, that it's not a 12-hour full load, or in grades 7 through 12 for at least 12 hours a week. There could be an earned income exclusion if they're in a training course to prepare for employment for at least 12 hours a week. So this could be connected to VR. And of course, they'll take into consideration homeschooling instructed in grades 7 to 12. So you have to ask for this. And then basically what that means is that if your student is a full-time student during that time, and they're earning, you still have to report the earnings, but the earnings are not going to reduce their monthly SSI check, okay? So the big thing here is the Social Security Red Book, and there's going to be a link for this, and you can find the Social Security Red Book online, and you can download it yourself. But the Social Security Red Book is just really a general reference source about employment-related provisions of the Social Security disability and SSI. So if you have a child that you're wanting to apply for SSI, it is going to be based off of the parent's income and assets and your working history. So you're going to want to read about that in the Red Book. And if you have an adult with a disability that is 18 or over, it's going to talk about how working affects Social Security disability and how it affects SSI. And it's really important to understand that there's different sets of rules for the different programs. Okay, so we got 2 different programs going on here. So you got to read the rules for both, depending on what benefit your child is getting. Okay. How are we on questions, Michelle?
We are doing, so they're talking about guardianship being the only thing that the Social Security Administration really cares about. And someone is concerned that she has a power of attorney, and she says, oh, that's not even going to help me. But you don't need to have guardianship over someone for SSI or anything like that, right?
I've seen it work both ways. I've seen the Social Security Administration be very accommodating and working with a parent that the child does not have the capacity and do, and fill out the, the representative payee documentation. And I've also seen them take a very hard-nosed stance on the guardianship. Guardianship isn't for everybody, and we are in Texas, and the Texas laws say that it is the least restrictive, most appropriate for the individual is basically what the laws are. So guardianship isn't a thing for everybody. There is something called the SSA 1696 form. Put that in the chat box for me, Michelle. SSA 1696 form. And so this is a form that you can have your loved one sign. So if you don't have guardianship, that will authorize you to call on their behalf. Okay, so they'll get that 1696 on file, and then you'll be authorized to call on their behalf. Okay, so child support. One thing that you guys need to know is that child support, if you're in a divorce situation, if you have a child under 18, that child support is going to be counted as income. And if they're over 18, a lot of the families have child support that will continue post age 18 for an individual with a disability. That child support really needs to be redirected to a first party special needs trust. You're going to have to work with an attorney on that and get a court order for that, because basically, if the child support is redirected to a first party special needs trust, it won't be counted. It won't be counted against your loved one. So this is really important. And sometimes people find this out the hard way. And the way they find it out is they've been clipping along, getting SSI for years. And they were also getting child support. And then the Social Security Administration figured it out. And then they, email or they send a letter basically saying you owe us $100,000, right? Because we overpaid you and we shouldn't have. So this is really, really important. And again, you're going to want to work with a qualified attorney on that. We do have recommendations for that if that is your situation. So if you have a child that's transitioning, if you have a child support order that is going to continue post age 18 and it is not directed to a first party special needs trust, this is an action item that you definitely need to take. Okay, so let's talk about RSDI and then we'll go back to some questions. Okay, Michelle?
Yes, a question that we have just popped up is talking about parents' benefits and RSDI, or SSDI or whatever.
Okay, so that we're right there. So RSDI, Retirement Survivor Disability Insurance. Okay, so basically, is the child 18 years of age or older? The disability began prior to age 22. Is a dependent of an insured worker or parent, is not married, and has not previously performed substantial gainful activity. Okay, so this is RSDI. Now, RSDI at the death of a parent. Okay, so the child could be over 18 and disabled, or they could be under 18 and be entitled to RSDI benefits. So this is where if a parent passes away, okay, so they would the minor children would be entitled to benefits for that. So when we're talking about RSDI under a parent's record, also known, sometimes it's known as SSDI, sometimes it's known as CDB, Childhood Disability Benefits, and for 40 years they called it DAC, Disabled Adult Child. No confusion there. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. They're kind of throwing around the same things. But when we have an adult child with a disability that we want to be covered for childhood disability benefits under our record, they can't have earned more than that $1,470 gross earnings per month. So it's important to know that. Okay. So when it comes to drawing from a parent's record, this is the important thing, and where everybody needs to know here. So we talked about SSDI earlier, and that the children don't pay in. If they haven't worked, they haven't paid into the system. So they don't have SSDI benefits under their own record because they haven't paid in. But when we have a child that has a disability that started prior to age 22, they have the ability to be covered under a parent's record for basically SSDI, RSDI, childhood disability benefits, or DAC, whatever you want to call it. And but they're covered under a parent's record once a parent is either disabled or turns on their own benefits. So they're not covered under a parent's record per se until a parent exercises their benefits. So how this works is, for instance, Michelle, if your benefit was $4,000 a month and you had a disabled adult child and you turned on your Social Security, your child would be entitled to $2,000 a month. So if your adult disabled child, was clipping along and he or she was already getting SSI, $914 a month, in this example, your child would switch over to RSDI under a parent's record, right, and would start getting $2,000 a month. Their Medicaid would transfer over with them, okay, because if they were getting Medicaid before, they're going to continue to get Medicaid when they switch over. Sometimes you do have to reapply for the Medicaid, but they'll continue to get the Medicaid. And then after 24 months, your loved one's going to get Medicare. So they'll be dual eligible for Medicaid and Medicare. So that is the important thing here.
Another
Sure.
thing to mention too is that it does not take away from the parents' amount that they get. So if I'm getting $4,000 and my child is going to get $2,000, I still get my full $4,000, and he would get his $2,000. It doesn't affect my benefits.
Very good point. The one thing that I think is very, very important is that there are such things as family maximums, because oftentimes we see where maybe one parent works, the other parent might be a caregiver, and so that parent will draw off of their spouse's record. Then we've got the child drawing off of the spouse's record. Just know that there is a such thing as family maximum. So your benefit might not be exactly the 50% that we're talking about in the event that you have more than one adult child with a disability, or if we have a spouse drawing off of another spouse's record. So you can Google the family maximums to learn more about that if that's you. So what happens? So let's say Michelle is retired. She's getting Social Security retirement. She's getting $4,000 a month. Her child switched over from SSI over to the Childhood Disability Benefits, or RSDI, under a parent's record. It's getting $2,000 a month. Michelle passes away. Then what happens to that child's benefit? So at that point, the child's benefit, as long as the child remains disabled that child's benefit would be increased to 75% of the deceased parent's Social Security. And this is where people say, well, can we get both? Can they draw both off of myself and my spouse? And the answer is no, it's one or the other, but you can switch. So if dad retires first and the child is covered, the adult child is covered under the parent's record, that's fine. Then mom retires, but mom's Social Security is higher than dad's in this example, then we can switch those childhood disability benefits under the mom's record. But again, you guys have to ask. So we're glad you're here. And we're glad you're getting this information, because a lot of this stuff you just kind of need to know. They don't necessarily tell you all of this, during the process. So you might be clipping along and have the child under one record where they could have been getting a lot more money under the other record and needs to switch. So that's really, really important. Michelle, I saw something in the chat box about, can help me out here, about switching over to our, let's see here. Something about SSI. A non-working adult taking SSI, what will that affect the parents' benefits once they retire? Again, to Michelle's point, so if they're getting SSI, when the parents retire, you need to let them know that you have a disabled adult child and that you need to, switch over to the childhood disability benefits under a parent's record, but it's not going to hurt what you or the other parent is going to get. It's going to increase the disabled child's benefits.
Yeah. Do you want to go through some of these other questions too?
Sure.
If there's thinking about child support, if there's back child support, that needs to go into a trust also, right?
Yes, and we just had this come up recently. It definitely does. You do need to work with an attorney to get that to get that back child support if you've been notified by the AG's office that they've finally collected some money or something like this. And this is the time of year, like tax refunds get garnished and things like that when there was, child support wasn't paid. You are definitely going to want to work with an attorney to get that moved to a first party special needs trust. And again, we can make a referral for that. Okay.
And the last question that we have for right now is when you're applying for SSI, do you have to apply for Medicaid separately, or is that automatic?
It's all automatic. SSI and Medicaid is all automatic. Okay. So, and again, Medicare is 24 months. So if the individual has a disability and they've worked and they've earned enough to apply for SSDI under their own record, Medicare comes 24 months after that. If they are qualifying for childhood disability benefits or RSDI under a parent's record, again, Medicare comes 24 months after that. So for SSDI, we're talking about Social Security disability. This is the one you pay into. You file an application, be found to be medically disabled, and be fully insured. This is the one we got to pay into. And the individual is not working or working, but the accountable earned income is less than the substantial gainful amount of $1,470 gross earnings per month. Okay, so that is that for that. So Michelle, do we have any additional questions on that topic before we move on?
Well, yes, one person said that she has heard that only 3 people can draw off of any one record. And I think it depends more on the family maximum, not how many people are drawing. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard that. I have not heard that. I'm thinking of one family in general that I know that has 3 disabled children and a caregiver, one caregiver and one worker. But I think it definitely does have to do with the family maximum. So when we have more than one child with a disability, typically what we see is that amount for the childhood disability benefits is split. So in the example, when I was given that example earlier of the 4,000, you get 4,000 and the 50% is 2,000 for that child, that 2,000. So if we had like 3 kids would be divided by the 3 kids, by the number of the kids. So in that example, those kids would get some RSDI under a parent's record, and they would get some of the SSI to bring them up to that full amount of the, to make them whole. Okay.
Okay. Do you want another one?
Yes, just give me
Star
one more.
Kids and Star Medicaid, when a child is approved for SSI, does it automatically transition from Star Medicaid to Star Kids, or do we need to reapply?
There's a lot of confusion with the state Medicaid program right now, and the general consensus is you're probably going to need to reapply. There's some rules and law changes that are in the midst, and some of the changes are not clear. Sometimes it goes smoothly and you don't have to reapply, and sometimes you have to reapply. And I'm sorry that that's just the lay of the land right now, as it is in Texas right now. And we've seen families that had success and didn't have to reapply, and we've seen a lot of families, a lot of letters have been going out about reapplying for Medicaid.
Okay, I'm going to answer the other questions because we've only got about 5 minutes left.
Okay, so we're going to keep it moving. So we want to make sure that you have your assets and your child's assets in the appropriate buckets. We always want to make sure that your special needs family member is not set up on a beneficiary on any life insurance or investment accounts that you have. If we have our disabled child set up as a beneficiary and we die, those benefits are going to go directly to the child, and they're going to have more than $2,000 in their name, and they're going to disqualify for any state or federally funded programs. That includes waivers, it includes Medicaid, it includes SSI. So this is really, really important. So if you're taking notes, always, and if you've been here before, you know I talk about this almost on every single webinar because there's mistakes on this all the time. You're going to want to make sure that any well-meaning family members, grandma, grandpa, any other people that might leave your child money, that they understand that it needs to go to a third-party special needs trust, not to the named child directly. So how we leave money for our loved ones, it goes to a third-party special needs trust for their benefit, not their name. So if the kid's name is John Smith, we don't ever leave money to John Smith. We leave money to the supplemental needs trust or the third party special needs trust for the benefit of John Smith. That's basically how that works. Okay. So there's 3 places that we can have money, and this is where we're getting to some of the slides where you're going to get the slides. And so if we don't get through all of them, the slides are pretty clear. We can have money in a special needs trust, and we can have money in an ABLE account that doesn't jeopardize SSI or Medicaid or any other public benefits. Those are the 2 places above and beyond a regular account that you can have $2,000. Remember, $2,000, 1 car, 1 house. But if you have more than that, where does it need to be? And it needs to either be in an ABLE account or a special needs trust. So in an ABLE account, I'm going to just move on to this. Contributions can be made by anyone. It's up to $17,000 a year you can put into an ABLE account. If the individual with the disability is working, it can be an additional $13,590. Everything in the account grows tax-free distributions, penalty-free distributions, as long as it could be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability. You can pay for it out of an ABLE account. We have entire presentations on ABLE accounts. We have entire presentation on guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, entire presentations on special needs trust and how they all work. So if we've kind of hit on some things that you're not really sure about and you want to know a little bit more, check out our YouTube channel on that. Michelle's got that contact information in the chat box, and it's going to be on our slides as well. Some people ask, why should I have an ABLE account and a special needs trust? An ABLE account can pay for things that a special needs trust cannot pay for without a reduction to SSI. So an ABLE account can pay for food and shelter without a reduction to SSI. If you pay for food and shelter out of a special needs trust, you can, but there will be a 1/3 reduction to SSI if you pay for it out of a special needs trust. So that's the why behind it. So here is just some items that special needs trust can pay for. You can buy a house outright or real property, but you're not doing debt service, rent, or mortgage payments or something like that out of a special needs trust without that 1/3 reduction. Okay, so this is just your slide here of don't use the special needs trust for monthly debt service to avoid that 1/3 reduction in SSI. One of the things that we didn't mention, Michelle, and I think it's important, is if you're already getting SSI and you're not getting $914 a month, you might need to submit a rent or a fair share agreement. They will cut your SSI benefit by 1/3 if the child is not paying rent. So if you have an adult child with a disability, Once that SSI is approved, you need to submit a rent or a fair share agreement. You can reach out to us. We have a template for that, basically indicating that they're paying $500 or $600 a month will be fine. And then when they get their SSI, you need to move that rent from the account where the SSI goes to whoever they're paying rent to. Now, what you choose to do with that money is up to you. You could turn right around and put it back in their ABLE account. But if you're not getting the full amount of the SSI, that is why. Okay. So when it comes to special needs planning, we really help people figure out, the future care plan. It's all fine and good when we're of sound mind and body now, but what if we're not later? What if it's 30 years from now and you're not feeling as great as you feel now? Having a plan and being intentional on your plan is really, really important. We can help with that. We always suggest considering, what are the opportunities after high school? There's educational programs, vocational options. We have college planning for individuals with a disability on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out as well. And consider, touring transition programs. It's a school, Monarch has good transition programs. If you're attending and you're not at Monarch now, have you looked at the various transition programs that are out there? And we always just suggest that you make careful considerations before naming a sibling as a future caregiver. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about a lot of things today. These are some things that we want you to keep on your radar. We want you to know about waivers, interest lists. These are Medicaid waivers. Every state has them. So if you're attending from out of state, all states have Medicaid waivers. We've talked a lot about SSI and SSDI, and I hope it's been enough to untangle some of the confusion and some of the acronyms out there. It is a lot for sure. Check those beneficiary designations as we mentioned. If we're coming around the bend and the child turning 18, we really need to have some intentional conversations as it relates to special needs trust, getting those set up and thinking about what your path for guardianship or alternatives to such is. We've got upcoming webinars, and this is going to be the link that you're going to be able to click on. It'll have all of our webinars for the month, and you can register for those. When you register for those webinars, you will get a copy of the slides and the recording once that webinar has been completed. We work on a collaborative team here. You have had myself and Michelle today, but we all work together. Again, nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. So we always like to put some faces with the names. There's always a lot more questions than we have time to any given presentation to get to. We offer free personalized consultations, and so we're happy to meet with you and talk to you further a little bit more about your questions. You can hover your camera over this QR code, and it'll take you to a calendar where you can schedule directly with us. We've mentioned our Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, our Facebook page. All of our additional information is out there as well. Michelle, we're over time, but I think we have a few more questions in the chat box. And so if there's any other questions that we can answer, I wanted to answer them really quick.
The only question, and I Googled it, but they were asking if you have to be living in the United States for a certain amount of time before you apply for Social Security.
SSI is not going to pay out of the United States. The Social Security disability, there's countries of reciprocity, and so I would have to look that up. You do need to be in the U.S. to apply for SSI. Medicaid is state specific, so if you move out of state, you don't have Texas Medicaid anymore. So that is definitely a thing that you would have to reapply for Medicaid in the new state. Any additional questions?
No, I just want to remind everybody that this was recorded and you will receive the slides and the link to the recording later on today in your email. Also, we will be reaching out to you to see if you have any further questions or if you want to schedule your free consultation. So please don't hang up on us. We're just trying to help out. And if you're watching again on our podcast and you want a copy of the slides, just email contact@cpgcares.net. And the last thing, does SSDI give you Medicaid?
So it doesn't. SSDI, after 24 months, you get Medicare. But if you were getting Medicaid first under SSI, then you would keep the Medicaid. So SSI, the Medicaid, if you were getting Medicaid first, if you weren't getting Medicaid first, it could be a problem, and it depends on the amount of the SSDI under the parent's record. So we can get in the weeds with you on that. There is a such thing as the Pickle Amendment, which basically says that when people switch from SSI to SSDI, that they become in a pickle and they are at risk of losing Medicaid, which they don't want to, because they might be getting a Medicaid waiver that requires Medicaid eligibility. And the Pickle Amendment basically says if you were getting Medicaid first and you switch over to SSDI or childhood disability benefits under a parent's record, that you're going to get to keep Medicaid. Sometimes you still have to reapply. Sometimes the switch is flipped and you don't have to reapply, but sometimes you do have to reapply. So thanks everyone for being awesome today. Happy Monday. Thanks for your great questions. If we had any additional questions that we didn't get to today, we apologize. There's a lot of content today, but we do look forward to chatting with you directly. So thanks so much and have a great week.
Thank you.